Purim story is often associated with frivolity and merrymaking, something that can be difficult to do when one is going through a challenging time. If one takes a close look at the book of Esther, though, the text that we read on this upcoming holiday of Purim, one can find many opportunities for serious reflection and connection. There are three aspects related to the journey to becoming parents that I'd like to lift up from this book. To whom do you turn? Where does the buck stop? And families all look different. The book of Esther starts off not with Queen Esther, but with Queen Vashti, the king's first wife. He wanted to throw a party and have her entertain his guests. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command conveyed by the eunuchs. The king was greatly incensed and his fury burned within him. Then the king consulted the sages learned in procedure, for it was the royal practice to turn to all who were versed in law and precedent. His closest advisors were Karshena, Shetar, Admata, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan, the 7 ministers of Persia and Media, who had access to the royal presence and occupied the first place in the kingdom. Esther chapter 1, verses 12 and 13. This text invites us to ask, how do you decide who you can speak to about difficult decisions you're in the process of making? Who do you trust going to for advice? Who do you wish you could speak to about this process, but feel that you can't? Memucan, one of the king's advisors, offered this solution as to what should be done with Vashti. In chapter 1, verses 19 through 21, he says, "If it please your majesty, let a royal edict be issued by you, and let it be written into the laws of Persia and Media, so that it cannot be abrogated, that Vashti shall never enter the presence of King Ahasuerus. And let your majesty bestow her royal state upon another who is more worthy than she. Then will the judgment executed by your majesty resound throughout your realm, vast though it is. And all wives will treat their husbands with respect, high and low alike." The proposal was approved by the king and the ministers, and the king did as Memucan proposed. This part of the story asks, what does it mean when experts offer their opinion, and ultimately we still have to make the decision for ourselves? Memucan gave his opinion, but King Ahasuerus had to decide what he wanted for his life. When needing to make a decision, do you take into account suggestions from friends about what to do? How do you discern when to follow or not follow their advice? Many of the stories in the Tanakh focus on family relationships between parents and their children. In the book of Esther, chapter 2, verse 7, we read that he, Mordecai, was foster father to Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. The maiden was shapely and beautiful, and when her father and mother died, Mordecai adopted her as his own daughter. Mordecai and Esther remind us to recognize that there are many paths towards parenthood. We are encouraged to remember who are some of the important people besides our parents who have greatly impacted our lives. On the journey to parenthood, are there future possibilities or options that feel off limit to you? Is there one image of what a family looks like? So what do we do with all of this? It's great to know that we don't have to make decisions alone, even if we need to ultimately make the decision, and that we should keep in mind that there may be multiple possibilities from which we can choose, including something we hadn't previously considered. However, how do we find the courage to actually decide to find a path forward? When a royal edict was decreed throughout the land that called for the destruction of the Jews, Mordecai sent word for Esther that she needed to beseech the king to intervene on behalf of her people. She replied that all the king's courtiers and the people of the king's provinces know that if any person, man or woman, enters the king's presence in the inner court without having been summoned, there is but one law for them, that they be put to death. Only if the king extends the golden scepter may they live. Now I have not been summoned to visit the king for the last 30 days. When Mordecai was told what Esther had said, Mordecai had this message delivered to Esther. Do not imagine that you, of all the Jews, will escape with your life by being in the king's palace. On the contrary, if you keep silent in this crisis, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another quarter, while you and your father's house will perish. And who knows, perhaps you have attained to royal position for just such a crisis. Then Esther sent back this answer to Mordecai. Go, assemble all the Jews who live in Shushan and fast on my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens will observe the same fast. Then I shall go to the king, though it is contrary to the law. And if I am to perish, I shall perish. Esther is remembered for being brave, not because she did things without being afraid, but because she found a way to move forward even amidst her fear. What helps you feel brave? Who helps you feel you can do hard things? What's a ritual that you do or could do before doing something that's scary? What type of self-care helps you feel supported while doing something hard? Sometimes it can feel hard to know where God is in all of this decision-making and lack of clarity about how to move forward. The book of Esther is the one book in the entire Tanakh that's all of the Torah, the book of prophets, and the book of sacred writings, which does not explicitly have God's name written in it. And yet, if we look closely, there is a hidden reference. In chapter 5, we learn of Esther's plan to try to tell the king about Haman's evil plan to destroy her people over dinner. We read in chapter 5, verse 4, V'tomer Esther im hamelech tov, V'tomer Esther im al hamelech tov, yavo hamelech v'haman hayom, el hamishte asher asiti lo. Literally, this means, if it please your majesty, Esther replied, let your majesty and Haman come today to the feast that I have prepared for him. Some say that the majesty here refers to the majesty of majesties, that is God. One way this understanding has come about is because in the middle of the sentence, there are 4 words, Yavo hamelech v'haman hayom. And if one makes an acrostic from these 4 consecutive words, it would spell Yud He Vav He, the sacred name of God. And so we learn from this that even in the scariest of moments, perhaps when we finally need to make a decision about what to do next, when it is not clear how we are going to actually do the thing that requires us to be brave, even when the good and the bad, Hamelech and Haman, are in such close proximity to one another, that even there, we might find the divine presence. And perhaps knowing that can give us a little bit of extra courage to be brave and follow our hearts. Wishing everyone a joyful and courageous Purim. Chag Sameach.